Welcome to this edition of Bigger Game. Our guest today is Scott Idle, entrepreneur, author of Lift Others as You Climb. And that's capital CLIMB. It's an acronym. I guess I'll let you speak to that when we get to that point. Welcome to the show, Scott. Thanks for making time today.
Thank you, Abizer. I'm so glad to be here. Really appreciate you inviting me on.
Yeah, excellent. Tell us, what does the bigger game mean to you?
The bigger game to me is lifting others as you climb. I mean, you just talked about it. I think one of the things I've learned in my life is success is measured in many different ways. And what I've learned is that my success has been determined on how many people I've lifted as I've risen instead of just risen to heights. There have been things I thought I achieved alone. And I looked back and said, wow, that's definitely not alone. And when I didn't acknowledge properly the folks that actually lifted me to those heights, I lost a lot of those circuits. So I think the bigger game is about establishing a network of trusted lifters. That's what I call them in my books. Establishing a trusted network of lifters, a group that you can count on when things go wrong, to put you back in place, because it's a big game.
It is. Give us an example, maybe, of something that specific that we could get our head around and kind of really
Sure. Yeah. So I mean,
catch it
I
in
think,
our own lives.
yeah, I argue, again, you and I have become friends. We've talked about some of the complexities of life, but I argue that there's only certain finite number of actual experiences of life, meaning like losing somebody is an experience. It's something that is a massive, call it a wave. A wave is in a water coming over. I call them sandcastles, the things we build in our relationships in our life that represent the beauty of what exists, our families, and the fabrics of those strengths and the relationships are critical to that. And I argue when a wave comes over and crashes those and depletes everything that we've built over a course of years, we need people nearby to help us rebuild. If we find ourselves isolated on that metaphoric deserted beach, what do we do? I mean, where are you going to find a shovel, a bucket to begin to make a sandcastle from grains of sand that were just washed over? So I argue that we have these losses in our lives. When those things happen, for example, I've found my purpose in life is lifting others through their pains. I've got a friend who lost his father to suicide 2 years ago, next month actually, and I've lost my brother to suicide, and I lost my father the day before my 15th birthday. And I've learned that when you have those similar pains and those scars look similar, and you're willing to talk about them aloud, you can draw people in as an invitation to, I call it's a reach, right? And as a lifter, and he's climbing out of that hole, as long as he reaches back and we have those two things connect, on his end, it's about humility, and on my end, it's about my empathy and understanding what he's going through. When those two hands connect, a lift occurs, and we can get away from that deep pain. And I'm not talking about walking away or around. I'm walking through that pain with my friend who's lost his father to suicide. So he's actively climbing, and so am I. But that's what I'm talking about, the network of lifters that you need to survive the bigger game.
So, a lot of people talk about walking through the pain or being with the pain. In your view, what does that really mean?
That's a great
How does
question.
how does one actually do that, in your view?
Yeah. So I think all of us have something we can recall back to in our childhood, likely, right? Because things happen in our developmental process, things occur that take us off circuit. That doesn't fit where it belongs categorically. I don't know what age that may have occurred, but something that imprinted something within your brain relative to safety and fear, let's call it, right? And when we start making these measurements and they ingrain themselves on our mind from childhood in our adulthood, if that it's about fear, sometimes I argue, and I have some of those still that I'm trying to work through with some of my lifters. But when we get into adulthood, we realize maybe we didn't face that fear of that moment that occurred back in our childhood. And when we didn't face that fear, that actually is the pain I'm talking about. And if you didn't face that fear at some point in your life that imprinted on your brain some code, then the bigger game is going to be that you're plug in decisions into really critical structures of what you believe to be success and how you're achieving, to go around maybe the same thing that you went around 40 years ago, right? It might have been the thing in childhood where it's like, oh, that feels like that. I can't do that. I don't go to that wound. We don't touch that one. What I'm talking about is, and this is hard, it's really hard. And that's why I know I've got a very patient outlook on introducing my book and the concepts to the general public, because I'm going to the wound. I'm going to the wound. I'm not going to go around it. I'm going back to my old wounds, showing them to people in my book, helping them see maybe they have some that they've compartmentalized or put somewhere that has created a code that's making them go back to a plan that's not going to work, like I often did. And that's what led me to writing this book. So I kept trying the same thing, the same circuit, same code, and it wasn't working. It wasn't, success to me was like, oh, I'm earning money. My friends think I'm doing well, like all these measurements of comparison and validation. And it was like, wait a minute, like I've actually learned when I help my friend who's dealing with his father's suicide, and it's such a tragic thing. But when I help him, the joy that I'm lifted with internally, wow, that's truly healing. And that's the point, is I didn't go back to my wound to romanticize it. I went back to my wound to find my own strength, to convert that pain into power so I could introduce it to Tyler. And he knows about this story. He's approved it, by the way, but I could introduce the same concepts to Tyler to show him that there's a way through this. And again, I emphasize the word through. We want to tell ourselves there's a way around, there's a way aside. You got to go through it. And if you haven't gone through some things and you're trying to find a bigger game with your career or your relationships or whatever it might be, you might want to think about going back and going through.
I think you hit on a lot of interesting points, right? If I could just kind of recap just a little bit, it's like, I'm pulling off a Band-Aid, right? I got this wound, pull off a Band-Aid. I'm either pulling it off one pulled hair at a time, right? Or I'm just yanking the Band-Aid off, right? I'm either going through it or I'm pussyfooting around it. And, to your point, if I haven't been willing to pull that Band-Aid off like immediately, right? Like and sit through the fire of it, right? How much of my life have I spent, like you said, just going around it or taking actions and I'm maybe not even present to it, right? Like I'm not even aware of it, but I'm taking actions based on trying to pussyfoot around it or trying to escape it in reaction to it somehow, rather than, living a life free of that or with it, right? I am actually just opposing it, resisting it, living my entire life that way. And I can just see how that just leads to outcomes that aren't so healthy or even inspiring. They're just are.
It's even, and perhaps even scarier is the other outcome, which is it looks good, but it's not good. Right. So like what I talk about in my book, Abizer, I call it the Four Corners Matrix, and it's a 2x2 quadrant system based on willingness and ability. And everybody's born in the bottom quadrant 1, unwilling and unable. We're all born unwilling and unable. I can't do anything. I don't want to do anything at birth, right? And as we traverse, I call it the ladder that our parents introduce us to. Our parents live in those quadrant, they might still live in Q1, hopefully not, right? But if they live in Q2, which is willing and unable, they might raise a willing and unable child. If it's Q3, which is the one I'm talking about, able and unwilling. That's the scarier part for me, is that when you follow systems that may not work and you haven't gone through something and you still make it work because you're able to, but you're unwilling to go back and go through it, right? When you're talking about like what happens in life and why we don't traverse certain paths, I kind of think about me like driving in a car and programming something into GPS, right? If I learn over time that there's 4 train track stops and possible IEDs at the end of a where I'm going on a destination, I'm not going to take that. I'm not going to take that path, right? But what if there isn't an IED? What if actually the IED is a convenience store with one winning lottery ticket, and I stop traversing that route because of the 4 train tracks? The whole point is those train tracks might be times in our lives or pains of our life that we learned code that didn't work, that we've stopped going that route altogether. When we see it in our career, we started a new business and it's like, wow, nobody's buying my books. And that really hurts. So I'm going to quit, right? That might have been something from when we were young, when we didn't win first place. And so we didn't keep playing baseball, right? Like that sounds simple. And I'm not trying to simplify it and break it down to something that simple, but I do want to make it that simple because there's truth to it. And I think for me, and as I speak these stories in my book and what I'm making my career of, telling a path through pain, this is what it's all about, man. I want to actually resonate with somebody's inner stories that like, all right, maybe there's something there, because it'll make a better me. It'll make you better. And I'm not saying this person telling me, I'm talking to you, like all of us will be a benefit to somebody saying, all right, I'm going to go back and rewrite that code. I want to find a better way to deal with my emotions when things feel difficult, when I don't feel safe, when I have a fear that I can't overcome.
It sounds like those stories is going to be the second book you write here. It looks like you've already created your next book. All these stories.
I have started charting some. Yeah, that's the beautiful thing about what the subject matter I'm writing about, Abizer, is that this is my life. I'm not trying to come up with systems or something that is going to sell like hotcakes. I wanted to sell like hotcakes, but I didn't write it to sell like hotcakes. I wrote it to become really a reached arm. I feel in this world right now, my own personal, I have great friends. The reality is I'm learning every day to be better at explaining my needs, because I've learned code of my past to say things and hope and expect and pray that they understood what I meant. And then when they didn't, and I expected they would, what happens? This conflict, and you should have been a friend, you should have known. And holy cow. I mean, that's a perfect example of some poor coding that I did the best when I learned those strategies back in the day. We all do. But as we were talking about before we recorded, is that life continues to throw things at us and we continue becoming malleable. And if we don't allow ourselves, we become stubborn to change. Good luck.
So I think that's part of that growth system you're talking about, right? Converts into 4 quadrants. Part of it is having life throw stuff at us. So eventually we get to the point where we are willing to pull that Band-Aid off completely without going one hair at a time, right?
Yeah, or you're forced into it. You might even be forced into willingness. And so you talked about CLIMB being an acronym. Step 1 is letter C, choose willingness.
Yeah. So why don't you take us to the rest of it? C is
willingness. So choose willingness. Step 2, leverage momentum. I was very specific about the word momentum. And the reason why is because I argue that the world is full of motivation. Motivation's emotional. Momentum is mechanical. Momentum grows over time. It's something that it's kind of like, it's a learning system, right? Motivation, I could tell you, Abizer, let's go to the gym. We're going to do this. We're going to crush it. I'm going to do, bench 300 pounds 15 times. Like, really? And then what? I can't bench 300 pounds 15 times. The reality is momentum is what creates these dials of progress, and momentum is established over time. I'm sure probably of James Clear's Atomic Habits, and he talks a lot about systems. So I wanted to go a step further. Instead of talking about an individual, let's talk about a collective whole. So where Atomic Habits might talk about 5% better individually, I'm talking about lift others as you climb, being choosing willingness, leverage momentum individually. Letter I, identify lifters. Once you've chosen willingness, you've leveraged momentum, and I'm becoming more willing and able to do the thing that I want to do. I identify lifters. How can Abizer help me get to where I need to be, which is quadrant 4, willing and able, right? So quadrant 1, I call stuck. That's unwilling and unable. Quadrant 2 is starting, willing and unable. That person lacks scaffolding, the people, the skills, the things to become. In quadrant 4, lifting, willing and able. And then quadrant 3 is that outlier quadrant, able and unwilling. I call that stuck. I'm sorry, stalling. Stuck is quadrant 1. Stalling. So when we're able and unwilling and life looks pretty good, maybe we're unwilling to get our health right, but we look able to, we're living our life. Our marriage looks happy. Our kids seem like they've got a great dad. Our career is thriving, but maybe our health isn't good. We're unwilling to address our health. That's quadrant three. My argument is there's three sandboxes of life, and I talked about the sand earlier, but we learn in a sandbox as children where to become willing and able to play well with others. So I call in adulthood, we've got health, relationships, and career. And then I call it the American reversal, where we currently are as we focus on career, relationships, and health, especially in quadrant threes. That's where that lives. Able and unwilling looks like career, relationships, and health. Quadrant four, lifting, looks like health, relationships, and career, where our mind and our body are willing and able first before we can become willing and able to have a good relationship, a healthy relationship with somebody, and then bear children and raise them to quadrant four. And then once we have the health and relationships, all right, now, and this is obviously hard because the American system forces us into career really early in our lives before we have our relationships in check and a healthy foundation. My argument is, and this is what I'm trying to do now with my reinvention of or transition of a career, is if I can have my health established, my relationships established second, now my career can flourish because I know what I can direct my attention to and center my focus on. So I argue that that's what we need to do collectively is as a whole is lift each other willing and ably to quadrant four in whatever it is we're trying to mend in our sandcastles in those sandboxes of life, health, relationships, and career.
Yeah, that takes us through a life journey now, doesn't it?
It sure does. And there's still plenty of it ahead, which is, you talked about my second book. I have charted some ideas and I'm excited for it, but I'm definitely also being intentional about taking my time on this one. I want this one to have its full weight. I've gotten a lot of amazing feedback from readers, feedback that's made me cry, frankly. I didn't prepare myself for the level of resonance and the depth of it, frankly. The resonance, I knew that people would relate to it because I wrote it because I feel the world needed it. I needed it. I still read it. I have an audiobook that I also read myself. Really proud of that. I cry on it and I didn't edit it out intentionally because I feel like the world oftentimes wants to present a very crafted, sound bite that's going to look a certain kind of way. And I want to show my scabs while I'm talking about scars.
I think it makes it much more real, right? I think vulnerability is true power. And and you talked about pain. I mean, being able to acknowledge that pain is part of that vulnerability. So,
amen.
And that's interesting. You talk about pain and power going together. Maybe you can speak to that for a second.
Yes, absolutely. So I lost my brother in September of 2010. He was 6 years older than me. I dedicated Lift Others As You Climb to Jeff. And I got a phone call on a Friday, September 2nd, 2010. It was a detective in Seminole County, Florida. And he asked me, is my brother Jeffrey Idle? I said, yes. And he said, I'm calling to tell you that your brother is deceased. And obviously my heart sank. I asked, how, why. I learned that he had hanged himself. When you get news like that, Abizer, you can't, even as I speak it, and I've told this story hundreds of times, and I still have the effects of this story in my mind from the minute it happened. And the reality was, in that moment, I was planning for my mom to arrive. I lived in Chicago at the time, and I worked downtown. And she was taking a train into Union Station, and it was late. And she was maybe an hour and a half late. And I found this news out while she was on the train. And I panicked. I didn't know what to do. We'd already lost my dad years before when I was in high school. And I'm like, how am I going to tell her this? What do I say? I ended up calling 911. And in that moment, I was looking for lifters. I was identifying lifters. So letter I chose willingness to obviously take the call, to field the information. I had no time to really establish leverage of momentum. But I identified lifters. I called 911 in Chicago. An ambulance showed up. There was no real medical emergency, but I pleaded with them. I'm now 70 years old. We lost my dad. My brother just committed suicide. And when I tell her, she's going to have a heart attack. And I cannot lose my mom too. And they stayed for probably 45 minutes, which was absurd because they kept saying, if we've got a like real emergency, they didn't mean it that way, obviously, but a real emergency, that we're gonna have to go. And I understood that, but they stayed. When my mom arrived, I helped her into the back of an ambulance and sat her on a stretcher. She was confused and wondering what the heck was going on. I think she thought we were somehow getting a ride home in an ambulance, which was weird, but I've done wild things in my life. So my mom thought that might have been possible, but obviously when she sat down and I told her that Jeff was gone, that he had committed suicide, she crumbled. She didn't scream. She didn't throw things. All the things I kind of prepared myself for, she broke. Like, it's hard to explain. And on the drive home, we left from Chicago to drive back to Michigan, where we're from, to plan for the funeral. On that drive home, I remember thinking to myself, like, man, this is more pain in our life. Like, what do we do with this? More. Like, we already lost my dad, and we were just trying to heal, still healing from that. And I realized that day, if pain is a coin, its flip side is power. And I chose, okay, if that's true, and there's two sides, and I'm going to remind myself constantly to flip my perspective. Every time that this feels impossible, I'm going to flip to the side of possibility. And that's why I realized this willingness ability thing is far greater as a tool for me, as a diagnostic tool of understanding where I am. When that was a collapse, I fell to zero. I'm talking unwilling and not able to deal with any of it. I didn't know what to do. I chose willingness. That was number one. Step one, I chose willingness. And once I chose willingness and developed that process of leveraging momentum and then identifying lifters that can help me move with purpose, letter M, move with purpose, I began moving with purpose to heal. And when you move with purpose to heal and you have a network of valued lifters, you can letter B, the fifth step, which is be the lift. I can now lift others from the hole that I fell into on September 2nd, 2010. When my brother took his own life, and I hate to say it, but he took his life with a rope. And as morbid as it is, this book is my rope. I've repurposed the rope. It's the rope that may have taken his life, but I've repurposed it and I've tossed it down the mountain. And that's the purpose of Lift Others As You Climb for me, is I'm not sitting here saying I've reached a summit. Everybody do what I do and you're going to reach the top. I'm not at the top. There's no top. The reality is that we're all networked. We're all connected. And if we don't embrace each other and lift each other intentionally, thoughtfully, presently, without expectation of gain, this world is going to become harder to live in. I'd argue it's pretty hard to live in these days. It's pretty intolerable. And there are a lot of great people too. So I don't want to try to take this into a spin of negativity, but the truth is, a world where we lift while we climb and as we climb, it's not a world where I'm going to carry you if you need help. It's a world where I'm going to lift you when you need help, not if. And the reason why is because I remember what it feels like to be at a bottom. I remember what it feels like to get a terrible phone call from a detective you've never heard the voice of, telling you the worst news ever. I know what those feelings are. Now that I know what those feelings are and I know what that pain is, I know the flip side. I know the power of telling a story that's going to make people say, you know what, when that happens, I'm going to lift myself out of it. And then when I get to letter B, I'm going to be the lift. I'm going to go back and I'm going to lift somebody. I'm going to help them choose willingness. I'm going to help them leverage momentum. They're going to identify me as a lifter. We're going to move together with purpose. I'm not going to carry them. I'm going to lift them. And we're going to be the lift, which is letter B.
That is excellent. Yeah, the concept of pain, power, right? Pain is like a treasure chest of power. I think that allows me to, it's a blessing in some ways, right? Because I can be there for others in a way that other no one else can be. Like your experiences make you uniquely Scott Idle, and where you can connect with people and lift people, right, is unique to you because of your experiences and with the road you've traversed. So I think that's fantastic. You know,
I'll say this,
uh,
if I may, actually, I just want to interrupt there too,
yeah.
Beezer, because I think you're actually touching on something I want to go further down this rabbit hole. Is because I argue that, like you talked about in the beginning of this podcast, so like when people traverse around pain, right, and they rediscover purpose and elements that are not even close to that pain, like that life can look great. It can be great. It's not like you have to go back to your pain and somehow do something special to it. That may not be for you. It's not for everybody. In my life, I'm telling you, when I have actually integrated my pain into my life, and I could tell stories that used to like, I used to be so scared of telling. I couldn't tell them without crying. And honestly, as a man, I'm just gonna be real about it too. Like crying still isn't that accepted in culture. I mean, it's better. It's getting better. It's a lot better than when I was young to cry. I mean, but I'll tell you right now, I cry every single day, and I am not ashamed of it because frankly, I rejoice in the tears. I mean, that's even scripture, but I rejoice in the tears because the fact what it's telling me is everything still matters. It still means something, and it also is telling me that I'm integrating, and that's what I argue a lot. And my second book's going to talk a lot about this integration of pain. Excuse me, integration of pain to achieve full power, right? Because like it's one thing to process pain, it's a different thing to integrate pain. Like to process pain and feel healed internally, that's hard. It's very difficult. And it's amazing when you achieve it. And I'm not taking away from that milestone. But when you internalize pain and you heal it internally and then you integrate it and you can speak it in a way that lifts others, that's to me is the we. And I argue that the difference between illness and wellness, illness starts with I, wellness begins with we. If you separate the letters out,
Mm.
LLNESS, they drop, and you got I and you got we. So I argue that in our life, in our birth, right, willing and able, we're born unwilling and unable. We're born as an I, and as we traverse this ladder, the goal is to get to a we. It's hard to be a we in quadrant two, in a group of willing and unable people. You're all just going to sit around talking about what you can't do, and then it should be harder, but it's pretty easy in American culture because obviously when you're making money and you're able to survive, you could do that unwillingly. So in quadrant three, when you're stalling, it's hard to move forward with a group that finds themselves in a collective able and unwilling because we don't talk about how we can get better. We don't want to. We're able. What are you talking about? I don't need to go back and heal this pain. But what if you did? I'd argue these are what if we all did? What if we all went back and healed one wound? And I mean like sat in it, talked about it with somebody, marinated in it, learned maybe 5 or 6 things, maybe a lot more. And then we used it to integrate into our own self to tell people how to heal also through the same kind of pain. Have you ever told a story about a pain and somebody's like, yo, I've dealt with that too. And then you probably have a friend that's how the friendship started. And it's a deep friendship because it was that deep pain. And that's part of my whole point about what I'm making about like why these markers of our life are so important to go back to and address and learn from without fear. Because I mean, let's be honest, fear to me is it's a door that seems locked that likely isn't so.
Scary door too, perhaps. Even though
Very
it's
scary. Yeah, I
yeah.
mean, it's the dogs of doom that sit barking, right? Sit barking at the door to your destiny. They don't want you to go through that, right? And a lot of people would argue that fear might be a dead end wall or a brick wall or a hurdle. I'm making the argument in its simplicity, but in the actual true weight of its nature, a door. And it's closed. It's a closed door, but it's still a door. It still opens. It still has hinges. It still swings. It has a knob. And the reality is, most of my fears, I spent far too long walking toward the door just to reach my hand out and grab it. And so, what I'm hoping is, the reader of my book and where I think, people kind of need to be to enter that door is at least at a point where they're saying, you know what, maybe that is a bunch of barking dogs. Maybe those are barking dogs. If they
No
are,
bark and no bite. Yeah.
yeah, and just walk to the door, grab the handle, grab the book, open it, read chapters. I wrote it. It's a guided ascent. I wrote it very specifically as a guided ascent. I'm not a huge mountain climber, but metaphorically, mountains resonate, right? I mean, they show a definite destination point and a beginning point. The reality is, it's like start the climb, grab the door handle, see if it's locked. I bet it's not. Twist it. Quiet those barking dogs, grab the handle, twist it. When you open it, whatever's on the other side, and guess what? It might be more pain. I've had that happen too, where I've opened a door to pain and, you know, in pain, I've opened a door and thought it was going to lead to healing. And it was, oh, well, this is more pain. Wait a minute. And you almost want to run out of that door. I'm arguing, don't run back. Sit there, find a lifter, identify a lifter, move with purpose, be the lift through that one. And then we go through that door. Now I have a bigger network of lifters. And once you traverse to a height in your health and your relationships and your career, and those, they're all lifted to a point. They're all lifted up and forward. But you went back. You didn't go around. You went back. You went back and you learned things that would help you and help others and lift others as you all climb together. I bring things to people who lifted me because they lifted me first. Right? I come back for them. And that's actually what I'm doing in my second book is I'm going back. I'm telling a story about a neighbor girl who was 5 years older than me that lost her dad 5 years before me. And when she was 20, she found herself on the end of a phone call in the middle of the night from a kid who didn't have words for grief, and that was me. And she tutored me through math because I had to take double math classes in my sophomore year of high school because I failed my freshman year after my dad died. I'm going back and I'm telling that story with her. Her name is Annie. And like when I called Annie a few months ago to tell her I'm taking this endeavor on, she's like, wow, this is interesting. My whole point of these is like, if I can tell the stories of all these lifts from all the perspectives in a way that helps people map themselves and their own lives, what lifter around me do I have right now that can really get me some elevation quickly without costing them much, right? When you start asking questions like that, you can move much more efficiently. I found myself as an entrepreneur, I get so locked in stuck mode of like, there's so many different ways to go right now. And I don't know which one to choose. The one I argue that you should choose is the one that you can feel yourself reaching the doorknob. And if you can grab the doorknob and it feels like it leads to somewhere that might even be a little bit unsafe, go forward. Just go forward. That's all I ask. Choose willingness, letter C. Just choose willingness. I promise you at the end of it, letter B, it'll be found. You'll be the lift.
I think that's a great way to wrap this up. I think you've left us on a really inspired high note to take on our lives in a different way. I
appreciate that.
Your time, Scott. If people want to reach out to you and want to learn more, where can they learn more, reach out to you?
Sure. Yeah. Email me at scott@scottidle.com. You can visit scottidle.com as well. The book is available online. The hardcover color copy is on the scottidle.com website. It's available on Amazon in all forms. So I've got the hardcover, soft cover, and the audio version. And like I said, Abizer, the audio version, I'm so proud of it, man. I'll say that was a big fear for me, was reading it aloud. And these words meant so much to me as a writer. I didn't ever plan to read it because I never thought that far ahead until I was doing it. And I was like, wow, okay. So I spent 9 hours recording it in the studio. It's a 5 hour, 28-minute listen. And I promise you're going to hear my soul in that recording. And that's why I delivered it, because I've longed for men to stand up and say, yo, man, my soul hurts in a lot of ways, but where there's pain, there's power. So here it is.
Sounds like you grabbed that door and opened it. Fantastic.
I kicked it through.
Leading by example. I love it.
I kicked it through. So I feel unleashed, man. And there's still a lot, like I said from the start, I've not achieved any sort of summit. It's not an end game for me. It's the bigger game for me, Abizer, is lifting others. And that the more that I can do that, the higher that I'll rise, the higher we'll all rise. I envision a world where we're all living in Q4, we're all willing and able. We all have healthy sandcastles in our health, relationships, and career.
Yeah. And I guess we'll leave it there. Thanks so much, Scott. Thanks for being with us today. I appreciate your time. Lots of great nuggets here. Thanks again.
Thanks, Abizer.
Bye-bye.